Welcome, welcome. We are so glad that you could join us at Grace Church, wherever you're at, however you're joining us. We are so glad that you are here. We are in week 3 of our Be Rich series, our Be Rich campaign. That's our yearly generosity campaign where we combine our efforts to give. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about being generous in our community, and we've partnered up with some incredible partners, and we're going to tell you about how much you guys have given to make an impact in these organizations in a couple of weeks. And last weekend, we talked about serving and how serving is the attitude of how we achieve greatness, right? Service is how we achieve greatness as believers. And today, we're going to talk about love. Now, the whole thing comes from 1 Timothy chapter 6, when the Apostle Paul tells to his apprentice, his protege, Timothy, he says this: as for the rich in this present age, and that's all of us. I mean, if you live in America and you're watching this on a device or listening to it, you're rich in this age. He says, charge them not to be haughty, not to be arrogant. So don't be arrogant. Don't set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches. Don't set your hope on all the stuff that's going to eventually end up in a landfill. But on God, right? Set your hope on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. And he says, they are, right? The rich in this world, you and me, they are to do good, to be rich in good works, and to be generous and ready to share. And so we want to talk about the basis, because why? Why should we do all of this stuff? Why should we give? Why should we serve? And why should we love people that, quite frankly, we don't know, that may or may not, and probably don't, love us? And I think part of that goes back to how God is and our assumption. Right? Like when I started going to church, I had kind of a view of what I will call a traditional or typical religious view of God. And the assumption is that I get right with God, that I achieve a good relationship with God by two things. By keeping commandments, by doing what he wants, and then by confessing whenever I can't do the things that he wants me to do or not do the things that he doesn't want me to do. And that's how I get in a good standing and right relationship with God. I obey commandments, right? And so I have all these desires and urges in my life that pull me away, that say, well, I shouldn't, be good or be nice or, not take what's mine. All the things that traditional religion standards, we see, right? And I'm supposed to keep those. I'm supposed to keep those, and then when I can't keep those, when I mess up, when I choose to do wrong, whenever I do the wrong thing, I then confess. I confess. And it really, almost every religion has this type of thing. Lots of, this is not just Christianity, right? It's different flavors of Christianity have this, and we're going to talk about why maybe that's not the best view of Christianity. But it's found in them. It's Muslim, it's Hindu, it's Buddhism have this be good, do good, and when you can't, you got to confess. That's what it is. And not only does it just deal with me and God, it also pushes the limits of my relationships, right? So my relationship is this thing between me and God, and if I mess up, I'm responsible to him. And if I don't do the thing I'm supposed to do with God, then I've got to confess. But it pushes my limits with my relationships out here. If I mistreat you, then I don't ask you for forgiveness necessarily. I confess it to God. And once I confess it to God, then you and I, even if we're not good, I'm good with God, and that's really all that matters. And it not only does it push the limits of my relationships, it pushes the limits of my behavior. Because I'm always asking, Is X a sin? Is X bad? How much can I do? How far can I go? How close can I come to sin or wrongdoing without actually sinning? How close can I get to the line? How far can I step over the line before I can't come back? And here's the crazy part about it. It's really all about what I do, because even confession is part of my behavior, right? So how my behavior plus my confession, which is really just behavior plus behavior, really my relationship with God is judged by how well I obey God. Traditional religion says this, that your relationship with God is judged on your obedience to God. Your relationship with God is judged by your obedience to God. And you may say, well, I mean, yes, that's great. How else would you judge it? How else can I judge my relationship with God? Well, the answer, instead of just giving you the answer, I'm going to ask you another question. Who obeys you? Does your spouse? Probably not. Do your kids? Probably less than you would like. How about your siblings? Your parents? Do you judge how good your relationship is with those people by how well they obey you? Probably not. In fact, your best friends, do you say, oh, they're my best friends, and here's how I know they're my best friends because they obey me? Probably not. Do you judge your relationship if you have a business with your employees or your subordinates? Do you judge them, say, we have a really great relationship because they follow all of my rules? I mean, I know some of you, like your dog doesn't even obey you. Like you go to dog obedience, like you take your dog to dog obedience training and he or she doesn't obey you, but you still go, oh, we're just the best, it's man's best friend, even though even though my dog doesn't obey me. And so here's the point I want to get at that, is that we know that both intuitively and experientially that relationships are not built on obedience. Now, so why then do we think that our relationship with why do we think that our relationship with God is built on how well we obey? Well, I think part of it comes from living in society. And part of it is how we interact with government and society and structures. How would you describe your relationship with the government? I mean, most of you say, well, I don't have a relationship with the government. It's tenuous, right? It's a little tense at times. I guess and a lot of time you don't even think about it. Like if the government hasn't talked to you in a while, you don't get mad. You probably prefer that. If the government doesn't call you on your birthday and wish you happy birthday, you don't get upset. And in fact, if you ask the government, what is your relationship with this person? If you went and asked the state of New Mexico or the federal government or the city of Albuquerque, what is your relationship to Aaron Giesler? They would say, oh, we have the relationship is described as in good standing. I mean, that's kind of what I want. But would you want that? Would you want your wife or your husband to, if I were to say, how's your relationship? To them to go, it's in good standing. No, you would not, right? Some of you would hope that your kids would describe it at least as that. Maybe they don't, I don't know. But you would describe, you wouldn't want your kids to describe your relationship as good standing. You wouldn't want your best friend, if you say, hey, this is my best friend. You say, describe your relationship. In good standing. Nor your parents, nor anybody you really know. You see, this attitude that we have is like how good you obey determines how good the relationship is. It comes from societies. And not only does it come from societies, it comes from religious societies. If you look in the Old Testament, God is establishing the nation of Israel. And so you have kind of layered on, you have both a faith and you have a nation that are integrated, an integrated nation of faith. There's no separating the nation of Israel from the faith of Judaism. There's just not. And so as God was establishing a nation as well as a religion, which was very common at the time, much more common than it is today, there was this mixing in the Old Testament of society and faith. And so in society, God would say things like this: "You, O Israel, nation of Israel, today I present to you blessings and cursings." You can read this in the first 5 books of the Bible. You can read it in Deuteronomy when the nation of Israel finally gets to the promised land. It says, "I present to you today, you have 2 roads to go down. You can either go down the road of obedience, which will lead to blessing. You will be prosperous. I will bless you, bless you, bless you. Or you can go down as a nation the road of disobedience, and I will have unblessing," right? And if you keep going down that road, I'm eventually going to lead to captivity, the whole nation. And this wasn't individuals. Right? It didn't matter if a few individuals were bad or if a few individuals were good. Basically, as the nation went, God either had blessings for them or he removed blessings from them as a nation. This was all as a nation. Right? If you do good as a nation, I will bless you as a nation. If you disobey as a nation, I will unbless you as a nation. I will put you into captivity as a nation. Even for people that do the right thing, right? Even people that do the wrong thing, he will bless if you're in that boat. And we called this, right? We called this the Old Covenant. And it's meant for the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel. And what it was is the nation of Israel in the Old Testament was a national means to an international end. It was a national means to an international end, right? God said, through Israel, I'm going to bless the whole nation. Through Israel, I'm going to bless the whole nation. Now, what we know now by looking back is that the whole world was blessed by Jesus coming through the nation of Israel. You see, people thought that God was going to bless the whole world through the nation of Israel by Israel expanding, and eventually taking over the whole world. They couldn't see it any other way. But it didn't happen that way, right? It was very unexpected. And so Jesus, in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament, there were hints at this. He says, I'm going to make a new covenant with people, right? It's not just going to be a continuation of the old covenant. I'm going to take out their hearts of stone and put in hearts of flesh. I mean, there's all these tips and hints along the way, and people just couldn't see it, that there was a new covenant coming that wasn't going to rally around a religious state, but instead an international, multinational religion that follows Jesus, right? It doesn't matter what nation you're from, you can follow Jesus freely. And it says it's going to be people from all nations will worship Jesus. Right? And this is the new, and with this new covenant comes a new ethic, a new way to judge how good your relationship is with God. A new way to judge. It wasn't this vertical expression that comes with a traditional religion. If I do good, and then when I can't do good, I confess, that's how good my relationship is with God. That's a good judgment. It goes away from this vertical expression of faith to a horizontal expression of faith. And this horizontal expression of faith means that our relationship with God is measured, by our relationship with others. Right? So it kind of switches. It goes, hey, it didn't matter what your relationship is with everybody else. As long as your relationship with God is good, then you're good. But now the way that you judge your devotion to God, your relationship with God, is not, did I do good and did I confess when I didn't do good? It's now measured in how well do I treat others? Not just simply how well do I treat God. And so what the new covenant does is it simply takes this endless list of laws and turns it into one rule. Like one single command. And so open with me, if you would, to 1 John chapter 2. This is a little tiny epistle by the Apostle John. And he's writing to believers about the love that God has for them and the love that they have for God. And he says this in chapter 2, verse 1, "My little children, I am writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. He is the propitiation for our sin. He is the sacrifice, for the atoning sacrifice for our sins. And not only for our sins, but also for the sins of the whole world." So here's the deal. You have been loved by God so that you might not sin. That God is turning your affection away from all those things that don't fulfill, and your affections would be turned towards God. But if you do sin, you have had a sacrifice given on your behalf that gets rid of all of the sin in your life. But it's not just for you, and it's not just for me. It's for the whole world. For the whole world. And then it says this in verse 3, "And by this we have come to know him, if we keep his commandments." So he gives us a litmus test. And this litmus test is identical to the litmus test in traditional religious views. If you have come to know him, if you have come to know God, if you have placed your faith in God, if you love God, if you are for God, here's how you know it. You will keep his commands. You will keep his commands. Now, so that hasn't changed. It says, John, in verse 4, he says this, "Whoever says, 'I know him,' but does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. I know God, but I don't care to do anything he wants me to do. You might not know God." In fact, John says, you're a liar. If you say one thing and do another, you're a hypocrite, you're a liar. It says, "But whoever keeps his word, in him truly the love of God is perfected." Now perfected means mature. And we know that if you've been a Christian a while, that perfection will happen, but not until we pass from this life into the next. But until then, it is being perfected. It is maturing. Your love, the love of God is being matured in you. And it says, "By this we may know that we are in him." Okay, so far, we have seen something that's not very new. If you know God, if you say you love God, if you say you are a follower of God, but you do not do what he asks, you aren't really a follower. That's not new. I mean, that is just, it's like a truth statement. And then in verse 6, he says this, "Whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked." So if you want to know, right? "By this we may know," in verse 5, "by this we may know that we are in him." If you want to judge your relationship with God, here is the standard by which it's judged. And John says, you ought to walk the way he walked. He's talking about Jesus. "Beloved, I am writing to you no new commandment, but an old commandment you have heard from the beginning." He's saying this isn't a new idea. right? The old commandment is the word that you have heard. At the same time, it is a new commandment that I am writing to you, which is true in him and in you, because you have the darkness is passing away and the true light is already shining. Whoever says he is in the light and hates his brother is still in darkness. Whoever loves his brother abides in the light, and in him there is no cause for stumbling. But whoever hates his brother is in the darkness and walks in darkness and does not know where he is going because the darkness has blinded his eyes. He says, okay, here it is. Do you want to know if you are following God? Do you want to judge your relationship with God by the correct standard? I'm giving you this command, which is keep the commandments of God. But here it is. It's changed from do you do everything? Do you keep all of the hundreds of commands or even dozens of commands? Do you do the things that you're supposed to, and do you confess when you don't? He says, no. Here's this new commandment, this new way of looking at it. Here's how you can judge your relationship with God, is how do you treat other people? How do you treat everybody else? How do you treat people for whom God loves? Because verse 2 says, that everybody is somebody that Jesus died for. Everybody is somebody that Jesus loved enough to die on the cross for. Everybody is somebody whom God sent his son to die for. And so if you mistreat someone who Jesus died for, you have an issue with Jesus. Right? Everybody understands this. Everybody understands this because if I say, you know what, I'm okay with him, but I go and trash that guy's wife or daughter or son or mom, then we're not going to be okay. Right? If you and I are not okay, if you are not okay with the people I love, and your love for God is demonstrated, your love for God is judged. Your love for God is authenticated. Your love for God is illustrated by how you treat the people that God loves. Everyone. And so what's the rule? What's the rule about how you treat others? You say, okay, because keep the commands. Keep the commands. And really the rule is simple. If it's not best for him or her, it is sin. If it's not best for him or her, it's sin. And that's a departure from the old covenant into this new covenant. But to pull back to the old traditional way of viewing religious morality is strong. You say, well, is this a sin? Well, what can I say to that guy that's not a sin? Or what can I don't like being around him. So how far can I push him? Is it okay to send him a nasty email? Is it okay to, to trash him to other people? Is it okay? I probably shouldn't get in a fist fight. But where's the line? How close can I get to? How close can I get to? How close can I get to sin before it's sin? How bad can I be before it's too bad? How far can I go before it's too far gone? Right? Those are traditional religious views of looking at God. And if you look in the Bible for justification, right, on literally whatever you want to do, you can find it. And if you're stuck in this old traditional religious view of God, you will look at in the Bible and go, oh, hey, you know what you can find in the Bible? Rape, incest, murder, hate, violence, abuse. And sometimes that's all in just one story. If you want to find an example of perfect parents, perfect earthly parents in the Bible, you will find exactly 0 stories in the Bible. You can find lots of stories of neglect. You can find lots of stories of really terrible things that people do. And let me tell you, it's what the Pharisees did. That group of people that Jesus just really had nothing good to say to. He says, you guys, you Pharisees, you are so diligent to keep the law. You pay a tithe on your spices. Now, I mean, how many of you have ever looked up at the cinnamon and go, oh man, I'm going to, I've got 10 teaspoons. I'm going to take 1 teaspoon and give it to the Lord. Probably never. But that's what they were doing. He says, but you do that. You give a tithe on your spices, but you neglect your parents. You neglect the poor. You neglect the needy. You neglect the cast outs of the society. You do that. You keep the law extremely well without treating people very well at all. And now when we talk about good behavior, or even bad behavior for that matter, we do so, when we talk about behavior, apart from its impact on others, we really miss an opportunity to talk about the gospel. Because the gospel, the new covenant is this. Your relationship with God is illustrated, authenticated, it is determined, it is judged by how you treat others. And here's the deal. It is far less complicated. It is far less complicated. The new covenant is far less complicated, but it is far more demanding. Because there are no shortcuts. There are no loopholes. There are no escape clauses. Right now, sometimes, you want those, right? And if all you're trying to do is keep the rule, you can really focus on those. When it comes to the government, when it comes to, society, you aren't going to go above and beyond to make the IRS happy, right? If you pay your taxes and then you add some on top of it, that doesn't make the IRS more happy or less happy. You're just still in good standing. But if you use that in a relationship, if you approach your relationship with other people like you do the IRS and say, listen, if you make your spouse mad, and you do something really stupid, you screw up, it's your fault. If you go to your spouse and say, hey, listen, what is the minimum thing that I can do for us to be in right relationship? I don't recommend that. If you try it, it's not going to go well. Because that's not how relationships work. It's not how relationships work. Our behavior shouldn't be like that. And so we must ask the question, right? Because the question is not, what's the bare minimum I can do? Like, aren't you glad that's not the question Jesus asked? That's not the question that, Jesus didn't try to find a loophole or a shortcut or an exception clause. He came, he emptied himself, we looked at last week. He was obedient to God all the way to death on a cross, the most shameful death you could suffer at the time. And so the question we must ask ourselves is not the bare minimum, what's the least amount of thing that I can do? The question we have to ask ourselves is a great question that Pastor Andy Stanley started saying a long time ago, and I love it. It is this: what does love require of me? When it comes to relationships with other people, the question I ask is not what's the bare minimum, how can I avoid them, is there a shortcut, is there a loophole, how can I get out of this? The question is this: what does love require of me? You see, all the commands of the New Testament push you to this. All the commands of the New Testament push you to this question: what does love require to me? Right? It helps give you answers to this. Oh, think others of your, we looked at it last week. You ought to not think of yourself more highly, right? But like deal with your needs and think that other people's needs are just as important. Don't do anything out of vain conceit or selfish ambition, but instead be humble, right? All those things push us towards, right? Being humble, not doing things out of vain conceit, not doing things out of selfish ambition. They push us towards the answer to the question, what does love require of me? Now let me tell you, these are not for your benefit, though you might greatly benefit from them. And they're not really for God's benefit, because he's fine. He doesn't need you to do anything. Right? All these questions, this question, all the answers to it are going to help propel you into demonstrating, authenticating, really showing your love for God. Now, let me tell you, this is extremely hard. It was extremely hard for the first century church, right? Like the church gets established. Peter understands that when Jesus said, I've come so that the whole world might know. He understands this. He doesn't go into a non-Jewish person's house because he can't, because of his Jewish religion. He doesn't do that for 15 years after Jesus is resurrected. And they're still having fights about it and debates about it 5 years after that. 20 years after Jesus dies on the cross and goes up into heaven, 20 years later, they're still saying, well, don't we also have to kind of also follow that law too? Don't we have to follow this law, the vertical law and the horizontal law? Don't we have to do them both? And they finally just settle on, no, we don't have to follow this. Like the vertical law is not really the thing. It's the horizontal law, which is one rule. Like, what does love require of me? I demonstrate my love for God by how I treat others. And it's not just difficult for the first church, it's difficult for us, right? Especially depending on how you're raised. If you were raised Catholic or you were raised like in a legalistic form of Protestantism, that's kind of like what the culture I grew up in was. I didn't grow up in church necessarily, but growing up in that culture, it was earn your way in, do good, be a good boy or girl, do good things, be nice. Or maybe you grew up in an achievement-oriented culture. Or maybe you're a person that's always kind of looking for a code or a formula, right? A shortcut. You're always pushing the line. None of those ways get us to this horizontal demonstration of our faith. They just don't. You see, religion gravitates towards this vertical thing because we can control it. We can control it. We know what to expect, right? I know that I'm going to be as generous as I want to be. It doesn't matter what else comes up. I'm going to give what I want to give or not going to give. I'm going to treat people a certain way, the way that I want to treat them, because that's what the law dictates. The law dictates that I treat them a certain way. It doesn't ask the question, what does love require me? What is best for him or what's best for her? Right? It leaves me in control. But here's the problem, is it also makes people super selfish in an independent society like we have, right? In the West. If it's like I determine how I treat everyone, and this is how and I am the rule maker, then everybody is just super selfish. I don't know if you've seen that this year. Here's the other problem with that, is it makes religious people more vulnerable to be controlled. Because they can always say, well, what's the right thing to do? And hey, what is the right thing to do in this situation? And most of the time, the answer is it depends. Right? There is no absolute, never, no variation rule. It's like, well, hey, they said this bad thing to me. How do I treat them? Right? What does love require of you? That's the real question. But for people, right, for religious people become vulnerable to being controlled because, hey, this guy has the right answer. Here's how you make things right with God. Here's how you treat people. Here's how you operate in ministry. Here is how you do things. And what that really does is it makes people treat other people really awful. And that's one of the things that we try to overcome is Because we have people come into our area of influence, and they have been hurt by church and church people that have treated them awfully, terribly. They have done such bad things to them because that's just how we do things. That's the right thing. You see, in Christ, though, we have a new way. We have a better way. It's not about right believing. It's not even about doing everything right. It's about loving well. It's not saying, well, but what if, they don't believe the right thing. It's like, yeah, what's best for them? Well, but they're not doing everything the right way. Sure, but what's best for them, right? You treat them for what's best for them. And listen, even Jesus has said, it's okay. Sometimes it's best for people, like when how you treat them, it's best for you to remove yourself from the situation. Sometimes it's best for you to, to keep that boundary. But sometimes it's not. And sometimes it's okay to let them come in. Sometimes, you have to determine what does love require of me in every situation. And I'm going to tell you, it's usually more obvious than we think. You see, I entered seminary because I wanted to be absolutely certain that I was thinking the right things and believing the right things so I could teach the right things so that you could do the right things. And 5 years later, I walked out knowing this: Jesus loves me. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. And he loves you. And I am loved, and so I love God, and so I need to treat you with love. And you have different needs than the person sitting next to you. And you have different needs than I have, and so I need to treat you how you need to be treated. I need to do what's best for you. And you need to do what's best for me. And you need to do what's best for the person sitting next to you. And you need to do what's best for the person. You need to do what's best for everyone that is loved by God. And that's everyone. You see, I'm not always sure what to believe in certain situations. I'm not always sure what the right answer is. But I almost always know what love requires of me, even when I don't want to do it. You see, asking that question, what does love require of me, is much less complicated, but it's much more demanding. But it has the potential. It has the potential to change everything. What does love require of me? When you're at the store, what does love require of me? When you're dealing with your children, what does love require of me? When you're dealing with your spouse, what does love require of me? When you're dealing with your grandkids, what does love require of me? When you're dealing with the stranger, right? What does love require of me? When you're dealing with your cranky neighbor, what does love require of me? When you're dealing with that person at work that just drives you nuts, what does love require of me? You see, in our Be Rich campaign, it's give, serve, and love. And love is not an add-on. Love is not a nice to have. Love is central. Love is the reason we give, because we have been loved generously and extravagantly by God, and so we do that in return. And we serve, right? So we achieve greatness. We keep his commands. Jesus was obedient to death. We want to obey God, and we do so by showing love to others. It's really the reason that we do anything. In 2 Corinthians 5, it says, "For the love of Christ compels us." That love comes down onto us and it flows out through us. And so this week, what I want you to do is something thoughtful for someone who will be surprised. I want you to do something thoughtful that will be surprised that you thought of him or her. It might be a thank you note. It might be a gift. It might be that email that you've been thinking you should write. It might be that apology that you need to give. It might be that forgiveness you need to grant. Whatever it is, you know, hey, what does love require of me that I am not following through on? How is it that I can show love? What is love calling me to do that I know I need to do? What does love require of me? And you can do it this week. If you want to see some examples, very easy. There's a link, berich.org/love, and there's some great examples. There's some videos of that. And I hope that this week you can demonstrate your love for God, your devotion for God. You can illustrate, you can authenticate your love for God by loving others well. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that you are a God that is good and that loves us. So, Father, help us to love others with that same love that you've loved us with. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Love you guys. I do. See you next week.